This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
France and the IMF call on world leaders and donors to boost growth and investment to reverse Africa's economic slump. Moroccan migrants overrun the Spanish border for a second day, overwhelming Spanish security. And France backs Egypt's efforts to mediate between Israel and Hamas as the Gaza conflict flares on. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what comes up on Africa Live Biz. Ghana is urged to raise its revenue and cut spending to bring down debt. And Dubai-based airline Emirates says it's on track to restore 70% of its capacity by the end of this year. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. We start the hour in Morocco, which is now recalling its ambassador from Spain for what it's terming consultations as diplomatic tensions escalate. Migrants from Morocco have continued to arrive in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta, despite Spain increasing its military presence at the border. Now, this marks the second day of record arrivals as thousands made their way onto European soil through the enclave. Many swam or walked across at low tide, while others used rubber boats. This comes after Rabat loosened border controls amid deepening diplomatic tensions. Spanish authorities said that by Tuesday morning, at least 6,000 people, including 1,500 thought to be teenagers, had arrived in Ceuta. Spain's Interior Ministry says some 2,700 adults have already been returned to Morocco. Now, Morocco loosened its border following Spain's decision to grant entry for medical treatment to Brahim Ghali, the head of the Polisario Front, a group that fights for the independence of Western Sahara. The disputed territory has been under Moroccan control since 1975. Morocco's foreign ministry vowed there would be consequences, describing Spain's action as being inconsistent with the spirit of partnership and good neighborliness.
As I stated, as much as Spain and Seville, Madrid, or Barcelona and the government will not hesitate for a second to take over whatever measures are necessary to reverse this situation and support the citizens of Ceuta. This is an extraordinary and exceptional situation to which we are responding with extraordinary means.
The last thing a migratory and humanitarian crisis of this nature needs is for political leaders to show hatred or fear. We therefore call on everyone responsibility, prudence, and a sense of order so as not to give rise to situations that could generate more nervousness or tension among citizens.
Meanwhile, there have been some tragic developments coming out of the coast of Tunisia, where at least 57 migrants have drowned in a shipwreck as they tried to cross the Mediterranean from Libya to Italy. The Tunisian Red Crescent says at least 33 others were rescued. In recent weeks, there have been a number of drowning incidents reported off the coast of Tunisia. Tunisian and Libyan coasts are the preferred points of departure for migrants, with Italy being the primary destination. The high number of migrants attempting risky journeys across the Mediterranean is attributed to favorable weather. According to the UN Refugee Agency, close to 23,000 people have crossed into Europe this year, with most new arrivals landing in Italy and Spain from Tunisia and Algeria. All right, let's bring you news coming out of France now. President Emmanuel Macron is calling for more investment in Africa. France has been hosting several African leaders in Paris for a summit to discuss financial support to help African economies recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. While addressing delegates, President Macron also called for good governance on the continent as he pushed for what he's termed a new deal for African economies. Now, more than a dozen African countries and representatives, including from the World Bank, the IMF and the Paris Club, attended the meeting. Well, our correspondent Ross Cullen has been following events at the summit in Paris. He now joins us live from the French capital. Ross, indeed a promising sentiment coming out of the France-Africa Financing Summit. Talk us through the commitment some of the big powers are making with regard to supporting Africa.
Well, Lindy, we are hoping to hear more on the major announcements and what's being concluded at this meeting with the end of meeting press conference from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, the host, and also from Félix Tshisekedi, the head of the African Union and the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. That news conference has been delayed as discussions continue. We have had an afternoon of seminars and sessions and meetings here in Paris with 30 African heads of state and government, representatives from international institutions like the World Bank, the World Food Programme, many European leaders also physically present here in Paris to try to agree on a refinancing package for African economies. This is meant to be a summit to show how developed nations can support developing nations, and that's something that the head of the IMF touched on in her remarks earlier this afternoon. Kristalina Georgieva was saying that this is a time for extraordinary action. She said we need to reverse this very dangerous divergence between developed nations and developing nations, something that she hopes her institution, the IMF, can do through special drawing rights, $650 billion worth of extra liquidity to try to help African nations recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to support African nations overall economic growth and improvements in infrastructure investment, for example. So they're the type of specific discussions that are going on in Paris this afternoon under the broader summit of financing African economies and trying to come to a major agreement on debt restructuring and also investment opportunities.
And now, Ross, considering how difficult the pandemic has been for many African countries, African leaders may have entered this meeting with high expectations. Do you feel that has there been any reaction so far from African leaders to the messages coming out of these meetings? Are they essentially satisfied with what they're hearing?
Well, we heard from Félix Tshisekedi earlier this afternoon in those preparatory remarks he made before the sessions got underway, and the DRC president was saying this is a great opportunity for Africa. We need more investment, we need increased security for people across the continent, and also he said we mustn't just focus on national solutions. There needs to be regional answers as well, and there needs to be a focus on local investment opportunities as well, engagement with local communities, not just speaking to national parliaments. There needs to be real engagement further down the chain. But there have been sideline discussions as well between the French president and also so many presidents that are present here in Paris. We have the South African leader, the Nigerian leader, the president of Ethiopia, Rwanda, Ivory Coast, Angola, Mozambique, and there have been general discussions with all those leaders, but also specific discussions. For example, in Mozambique, the deteriorating security situation in the province of Cabo Delgado that we saw, and the cancellation by French oil major Total of the moment of its focus in its gas project off the coast of Mozambique. Is there going to be an answer on that? Specific discussions between Mr. Macron and Mr. Filipe Nyusi, the president of Mozambique. So there have been specific discussions on issues particular to each African nation, Lindy, but also wider discussions on the general approach of how to support the continent as a whole.
And of course, this meeting was convened by the French President Macron. What is expected to happen next, though, Ross, in terms of a push for financial relief for Africa? Do we expect the likes of the WTO or the Paris Club to make any similar overtures or any efforts to bring this group of countries together again?
Well, the focus really is on Paris at the moment, and Emmanuel Macron has made it so. We had on Monday the summit focusing on the democratic transition taking place in Sudan. Mr. Macron is in regular contact with his G5 partners, with Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali and Mauritania, where France has 5,000 troops across those regions trying to dismantle and disrupt armed groups. So France is really in contact with a lot of those players in Africa. Emmanuel Macron has made Paris the fulcrum of influence when it comes to Africa with today's summit across the whole continent. But the next stop for Emmanuel Macron when it comes to focusing on Africa further down the line, we can expect more announcements at the France-Africa Summit, Lindy. This is meant to be in July, delayed to October due to the pandemic. It's going to be held in the southern French city of Montpellier, and we can expect there more focus on what Felix Tshisekedi was talking about earlier, more focus on civil society. Recent summits of France-African leaders have been the heads of state and heads of government, but there's been a focus to try to move more representation from mayors, from feminist activists, from climate activists, from youth. That's particularly something that Emmanuel Macron says we need to focus on, saying that youth, productive strength and the ability to meet challenges, they are the three reasons why Africa has all the tools it needs to succeed. So what we need to watch out for now are major announcements coming out of this summit we've had today. Already noises from the IMF about how they can help with special drawing rights, but we do need to hear from further discussions down the line, as you mentioned, maybe from the World Trade Organization or the group of rich creditors known as the Paris Club, if they can announce any other packages that can aid African economies to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Ross Cullen, thank you so much. Following developments there for us from Paris. Well, staying with this story, of course, the France-Africa Summit concludes today, but not without some key statements from political leaders. Let's have a listen now to what President Macron and DRC President Felix Tshisekedi had to say.
Africa has all it takes to succeed. It has a youth, a productive force, and the ability to take on challenges such as the climate and food emergencies in particular. If we, collectively, decide to propose a new deal, it is that first stone that we wish to lay during this Paris summit.
We are gathered here to reverse what has developed as a very dangerous divergence between advanced economies and developing countries, especially Africa. We have to go back to the strong development Africa had before COVID, for Africa and for the rest of the world. Africa this year is expected to grow only 3.2%. The rest of the world, 6%. We have to boost growth, public and private investments in Africa. And we can do that by mobilizing financing from international organizations, from bilateral donors, and of course from the countries themselves.
We should see, when it comes to Africa, how we could, at the level of regional economic communities, propose a sort of financial safety net that could allow us to face crises of that kind.
Now turning to the Israel-Palestine conflict, Palestinians are staging a general strike and protest in Israel and the West Bank. They're protesting against Israeli military attacks on Gaza and against the Israeli military occupation, as well as plans to evict residents from a neighborhood in Jerusalem. All non-essential Palestinian businesses have closed in cities in Israel, Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Israel's army says it killed a man who was trying to attack occupation forces in the West Bank town of Hebron. And in Gaza, Palestinian health officials say the death toll there now stands at 213, 61 of whom are children. The intensity of attacks from both sides has reportedly been waning. Here's more from our correspondent, Noor Harazin, followed by an update from AP reporter Emily Rose on demonstrations by the Arab community in Israel.
If we compared today to what was happening in Gaza for the past week, yes, we can say that it is a little bit quiet and calm today. And amazingly, the residents here, the citizens of Gaza, have gone out to the streets. Many of them are sitting in front of their houses. Several shops has opened, closed shops, supermarkets. Apparently, the people, even though there is no a truce, however, the people are trying to convince themselves that they can live the right of movement. And apparently they want to send a message to the Palestinian militant groups and also to Israel that they have had enough. However, we can still hear the Israeli warplanes, the Israeli drones hovering over Gaza. There is strikes every now and then. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, the death toll right now is up to 213, including 61 children.
It's almost an unprecedented sign of unity, what we're seeing in terms of the demonstrations, both across the Arab communities in Israeli territory as well as across the West Bank. Today, shops were closed in Arab neighborhoods across Israeli towns, Arab Israeli towns, and also a series of demonstrations held in the major cities in the West Bank as well as Jerusalem. This is a real sign of unity coming from across this Arab population, which is trying to, as we know, show its opposition towards this ongoing engagement between Israel and Hamas, and it could continue on. There are concerns here among the Israeli security brass that this could escalate into clashes.
Well, Egypt's attempts to mediate in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have received the backing of French President Emmanuel Macron at a meeting between Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Macron, and Jordan's King Abdullah II. Now, the king joined the meeting in Paris via video link. The talks are aimed at finding concrete solutions to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Macron hails the mediation as key to avoiding further violence. Our correspondent Adele AlMahri has been following these developments closely. He now joins me live from Cairo. Adele, some concerted efforts coming out of Egypt to try and broker a ceasefire. What are the feelings in the region regarding any chances of a breakthrough?
Well, at least there is international progress that Egypt is getting. First of all, Egypt was among the first nations and actually the first to have a delegation on the ground that visited Gaza and is currently in Israel, in Tel Aviv, to continue the talks trying to reach a ceasefire. Then it escalated this level of mediation to the foreign minister's level after Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry has been in talks with his counterpart in Israel, in Germany and other countries as well, trying to rally support to the ongoing efforts that Egypt is leading, trying to broker a ceasefire between Hamas, the Islamist militias, and the resistance in Palestine and Gaza territories from one side and the Israelis from the other side. Now, what we're seeing today is a support on the summit level or on the presidential level after President Emmanuel Macron has showed confidence in Egypt's led mediation efforts. In the summit that you've mentioned, it also included Jordanian King Abdullah, and both of them are the two adjacent countries to Gaza, that's Egypt, and the West Bank from Jordan's side. And these two countries are quite influential when it comes to supporting the Palestinians, giving aid and allowing the free movement of Palestinians out of their territory. So with these efforts and what we've been seeing lately with President Joe Biden also calling for a ceasefire, Germany and the number of nations calling for a ceasefire is escalating. China was among the first nations to call for that as well. So all of these put like an international pressure to support the efforts to reach a ceasefire from both sides, whether it's Egypt, Turkey, or Qatar as well, who are, and United States, who are also moving in parallel mediation efforts. In general, this should be enough to have some hope, but what we're seeing is resistance from both parties on the ground who have the guns and are attacking each other.
And of course, we're seeing Egypt playing an important role on the diplomatic level, but also on the grassroots level. We know Egypt is helping wounded Palestinians and has opened the Rafah crossing earlier than usual. Tell us more about the situation on the ground.
There's a popular movement, a massive one actually, on numerous levels. First of all, the Egyptian Red Crescent organization is moving to collect donations and has already sent several shipments of medical supplies and humanitarian aid to Gaza through the Rafah passage that Egypt controls. There are in parallel NGOs that are moving, and even individuals who are collecting donations from the public, trying to do the same effort in terms to support the Palestinians with any possible possible mean. On the other hand, we have the Egyptian government, who has over a dozen ambulances on standby at the Rafah passage in case there are injuries. There are people in critical conditions that need immediate health care. They come through the Rafah passage, and Egypt has designated at least 3 hospitals to welcome them. That's come beside, of course, what the announcement that the doctors syndicate made a couple of days ago, saying that over 1,200 doctors have signed up to volunteer to give their medical services for free to Palestinians. So there is a huge movement on so many levels, and it only shows the solidarity and the compassion that Egypt has towards the strife that the Palestinians in Gaza specifically are suffering from.
Thank you so much, Adele AlMahri, joining us there from Cairo. Now, China has slammed the U.S. over a potential arms sale to Israel. This comes as international calls for a stop to hostilities grows. Here's a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
Most of the UN Security Council members have called for an immediate ceasefire to prevent a full-blown crisis. They have called for the protection of civilians and putting an end to the rising casualties. They insist on a political solution, urging both sides to resume peace talks on the basis of the two-state solution. They also think that all Security Council members should have a unanimous voice over this issue and proceed in a fair manner. The process aims to promote the peaceful coexistence of Palestine and Israel. But the US has not only failed to act to stop the conflict, but also has even prepared to add fuel to the fire.
News from India now. Over 140 people have been rescued, but dozens more remain missing after a barge drifted into the sea during a cyclone on India's western coast. Our correspondent Ravinder Bauer has more.
The gusty winds and the rain are becoming a hurdle in the rescue operations. Apart from that, the coast guards are also supporting the Navy in the meantime in other parts of the country where the cyclone has ravaged the houses, the electricity poles, has uprooted trees. Those are being now cleared by the army with the help of the army and also the National Disaster Response Force. 54 of their teams have been deployed on the ground. 4 states have been impacted by this cyclone, which is Kerala, Karnataka, Goa, Maharashtra, and Gujarat is one of them which is the worst affected out of all of these. Of course, Mumbai is also seeing winds to the speed of 80 to 90 kilometers per hour, but the Met Department has just announced that the cyclone has toned down a bit. It is less, it is severe, but of course it is not as bad as it was after the landfall. It has weakened a little bit, and that is, it's in the next few days, it's going to have an impact on all over the country, especially the states which are falling on the path of the cyclone, which will see rains, which we are here in Ranchi as well as a part of an impact of that. But definitely Maharashtra and Gujarat are the worst affected.
You're watching Africa Live. More news after this short break. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Shirushi, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. We start in Tanzania now, where a committee formed by President Samia Suluhu Hassan to evaluate the impact of the coronavirus pandemic has advised the government to look into importing WHO-listed COVID-19 vaccines. The committee came up with 19 suggestions to tackle the spread of COVID-19 in the country. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
This could be the most awaited report in Tanzania's medical history. The National Committee, tasked with advising the Tanzanian government on how to deal with COVID-19 has shared its findings. It urges Tanzania to join the COVAX facility and obtain free COVID-19 vaccine doses. COVAX is a WHO-backed initiative aimed at equitable global vaccine distribution. The committee says evidence shows the vaccines are scientifically proven to work effectively and efficiently.
Regarding the COVID-19 vaccine, the committee is advising the government to use the relevant institutions to start the process of allowing the free use of COVID-19 vaccines in the country.
The committee also confirmed the country has gone through 2 major waves of the pandemic and says it is vulnerable to a third. Tanzania is eligible for free vaccines from COVAX, but unlike its neighbors Kenya and Rwanda, late President Magufuli's administration did not take steps to receive doses. Now the country waits to see if newly appointed President Hassan's government will proceed with procuring the doses. The committee also urged the government to start releasing COVID-19 data. Tanzania last released numbers almost a year ago, when the country only had 509 officially confirmed cases.
The government should release accurate COVID-19 data to the public and the WHO so that citizens can get the right information from government agencies. This also allows the country to comply with international treaties it had committed itself to.
Other recommendations include strengthening COVID-19 prevention efforts, establishing domestic vaccine manufacturing facilities, and improving diagnostic capacity. All issues that the diplomatic community in Tanzania says it supports.
You know, we are in a global community, so borders are porous, people travel, so it is important to reassure the international partners that there is a policy on health and in this case on COVID in the country, and that certain initiatives are taken. So from the perspective of an international partner is certainly positive development.
The committee advised Tanzania to submit the necessary documentation to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to start receiving doses and to participate effectively in implementing regional and international resolutions. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
South Africa has moved to phase 2 of its national COVID-19 vaccination drive. The phase is targeting citizens over the age of 60, as well as the balance of healthcare workers still requiring jabs. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
South Africa's much anticipated second phase of the vaccination program is finally underway, spread across all 9 provinces. The drive is currently focusing on old age homes before it gets spread out to other older people. The first day of this phase went relatively smooth.
Inside the vaccination center, we have seen a lot of very experienced nurses. Those nurses know exactly what they are doing. I've been impressed with the fact that they've moved very fast, and it takes a very short time, a couple of minutes, to vaccinate and finish. Then the electronic system, also because they have to check that and consent and everything, they are technical experts who will come in, and technicians who will come in and fix the system if there's a challenge with the laptops that they are using for registration.
According to the health authorities, thus far, just over 1 million people over the age of 60 have registered to receive vaccines. The health ministry is aiming to vaccinate at least 5 million people in this age group by the end of June.
I think it's great because not only for me, for the society at large, because that's where I think we'll get not exactly the cure, but things will get better with us.
I've got confidence in it, and I think it will work, yeah. Everyone should take it. That's the only way we will get rid of COVID-19 if we vaccinated, yeah. So it's quite exciting to have it today, yeah. We've been waiting a long time. Ever since it started, we was hoping for this vaccine, but today is a great day.
The South African government has elected to involve well-known elderly South African citizens to encourage the rest of the population to get their jabs.
I'm here to say if you want to drive safe in the road, you must observe the rules. Now for us, for the country to come back to normalcy, we must vaccinate. It's very important that, coming here, it inspire everybody that, listens to us on our platform and everybody in the country that it's normal for you to vaccinate.
I think I'm one of the most privileged people in South Africa to have had that opportunity to be vaccinated on the first day of the second phase of the rollout. I think that I speak for all judges and all the judiciary, that we all just can't wait to get our jab.
The health workers who have not been vaccinated yet can still be inoculated during this phase. Yoli Sanjamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A group of Tunisian associations have come together to feed hundreds of sick children and other patients in public hospitals in the capital, Tunis. The volunteers collect ingredients and cooking equipment to make hearty dishes that feed the soul and boost the morale of the sick. CGTN correspondent Adnan Chouachi has more.
Mohamed Rushdi Krishan is a member of Let's Help, a Tunisian charitable association. It works throughout the national territory in favor of the poor and marginalized. The civil society activist says the initiative at public hospitals aims to give hope to patients, especially children and their families.
Only hospitalized children get food while their mothers do not have the right to a meal. That's why we are cooking healthy food for the mothers as well as their kids. The volunteers collected donations and ingredients to prepare and distribute the delicious meals. This action encourages the sick.
Healthcare providers and volunteers believe children can often become bored and lonely during long hospitalizations.
Our association has accompanied and fed patients during the holy month of Ramadan. It's hard for any child to be away from his family. Our role is to offer assistance during periods of festivity.
Let's Help and Ismani associations plan to organize many events in several regions across Tunisia. These activities will boost the morale of patients in the North African state.
This successful operation will continue. More patients and hospitals will benefit from the generosity of Tunisians throughout the year.
The distribution of food for hospitalized children and adults aims to encourage those who are fighting deadly diseases to recover.
The Tunisian government, the Health Ministry and the Social Affairs Department have welcomed the solidarity campaigns organized by civil society organizations. Now volunteers are planning to raise funds to renovate schools this summer. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lydia. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Ghana is urged to raise its revenue and cut its spending to bring down its debt. And Dubai-based airline Emirates says it's on track to restore 70% of its capacity by the end of this year.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Now, the International Monetary Fund has called on Ghana's government to control spending and to generate more revenue. This comes as the country implements reforms to reduce Ghana's debt burden that, of course, has worsened amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the country's debt currently stands at 78% of GDP in 2020, and that's compared to 64.4% in 2019. The global lender also says the rise in debt stock can also be attributed to the inclusion of costs which were incurred in the energy sector. The international lender has advised the government to adapt fiscal consolidation measures that will boost revenue in the country. Now, Ghana's real GDP growth is forecasted at 4.8% in 2021, driven by a rebound in mining services. Inflation is expected to maintain at 8% by the end of 2021. And let's head to Nigeria now. The country has recorded its first drop in headline inflation since the closure of land borders in 2019. The inflation rate stood at 18.12% in April 2021. It represents an 0.05% point decline when compared to 18.17% recorded in March this year. Now, on the other hand, the closely watched food inflation rate also decreased in the month of April. It went down from 22.95% recorded in March to 22.72% in April. Now, this could indicate that inflation has reached its peak in March and could be on its way down. Well, let's stay with money matters in Nigeria. Diaspora remittances have dropped 27.7% to just $16.8 billion in 2020. That's according to the World Bank. Now, despite the drop, the country is turning to these inflows to shore up its reserves and to stabilize its exchange rate. The country's central bank has introduced a raft of measures to encourage more remittances to the country. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more on that story.
Nigeria has been battling a severe forex shortage for close to 2 years now. With a reduction in oil earnings as a result of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, forex supply to the economy has been badly affected, forcing the central bank to carry out a series of devaluations to stabilize the exchange rate. The Apex Bank is now beginning to give diaspora remittances serious attention as a source of forex supply.
Before now, what we've seen is that we've only given a lot of I'll use the word prioritization to price of crude. When price goes up, we jubilate. When it comes down, we worry. And then two, we have constantly been looking at, anytime there is need for money, we look at what is direction of foreign direct investments and the rest of them. Whereas we pay less attention to diaspora remittances as well as export sector support.
The World Bank puts diaspora remittances to Nigeria last year at $16.8 billion. Some other estimates put it at $21 billion. Recently, the Central Bank of Nigeria introduced a number of measures to boost inflow of remittances. Recipients are now allowed to receive funds in foreign currencies and even get a 5 naira rebate on every dollar sent by Nigerians in the diaspora in what the CBN calls the Naira for Dollar scheme.
So it's facilitated and enable the rise of foreign currency inflows into the Nigerian economy. Also, let's not forget, in as much as that policy made a lot of sense, it is still not a fundamentally intelligent macroeconomic policy or monetary policy in a sense. And I'm saying this because that policy came right after the crypto ban.
The CBN says the policy is only a temporary measure to quickly harness the potentials of diaspora remittances and address Nigeria's chronic forex shortage. And thanks in part to the policy, diaspora remittances are projected to grow to about $22 billion by the end of this year.
We have also not created a structure around understanding the diaspora remittances market, particularly, all right? And until we can also unlock potentials in that regard, I do not think one policy would effectively unlock it. It only increases inflow, and there is more than just inflow. There has to be a strategy to diaspora remittances. There has to be a broader economic plan or a broader economic strategy or institutional strategy on how we can use diaspora remittances better, all right, especially for infrastructural and capital expenditure and enabling economic growth and development than just into direct people's pocket.
Diaspora remittances have been a lifesaver for many Nigerians, and for a long time, the government simply ignored its potential as an important source of foreign exchange supply. But it is now taking it very seriously. So what the central bank does next to further harness its potential remains to be seen. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, South Africa currently has 11 special economic zones scattered around the country. However, their capacity to make a difference to South Africa's economic growth prospects hasn't matched expectations, as Angela Coppola now reports.
The government has spent 20 years developing and implementing their special economic zone strategy.
The problem with it is that they have chosen the wrong model of SEZs. Instead of using them as a labor-intensive, export-oriented industrialization tool, they've used them as a regional development tool on capital-intensive industries where South Africa does not have a competitive advantage.
At the moment, South Africa's current proclaimed zones are very similar to the rest of the economy. Essentially, there are publicly financed industrial parks with some subsidized infrastructure and factory or office space.
Employment was one of the key drivers of the policy intervention. It hasn't succeeded. It's estimated that no more than 10,000 people are employed in those 11 zones. The proposal by the Centre for Development and Enterprise, the CDE, aims to change that.
The focus that the government of South Africa should have is labor-intensive industries with minimum amount of capital investment by government in, very expensive, sophisticated zones. It doesn't make sense. What is needed is to give massive amount of jobs to people who don't have jobs. And in essence, the CDE proposal is that.
The proposal calls for an experiment, focused attention on one special economic zone, and that's the Kruger zone in the Eastern Cape.
It would comply with basic health and safety standards, but it would allow individual factories to negotiate with their workers about piecework, about hours of work, and a range of other things. They would pay the national minimum wage, and we are requesting that the expanded tax incentive for first-time workers is expanded to all workers. All products coming out of the zone would be for export only.
What the city is proposing is to make sure that these industries that would locate in what are effectively export processing zones of the old type do not compete with the domestic market, local economy.
It's common cause that the special economic zone policy of government hasn't worked. It's now time for a new plan, and it's got to be enacted quickly. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And moving on now, Dubai-based airline Emirates says it hopes to recover its capacity to 70% of pre-pandemic levels by the end of 2021. Now, this follows an expected increase in international travel as countries ease coronavirus restrictions and reopen their borders. Early last year, the carrier was forced to lay off some 25% of its staff and slash its sprawling network at the height of the pandemic crisis. Emirates now says it is in talks to reverse that process and hire more staff in anticipation of an industry recovery. The airline has resumed passenger flights to 120 destinations. That's about 85% of the routes which it flew before the pandemic.
Our cash flow today also, or our reserve cash is good so far, but with the situation deteriorating sometime all over the world, we have to assess it month by month, on how the liquidity really will be for Emirates. But on the hope that will open, as we see the indication and markets are opening, but I'm confident that governments around the world, they will not be able to close down forever, and they must open. I think it's been tough for Boeing, because also we've seen a delay on the program of the 777, if you follow the program. But we are in dialogue with Boeing on the future fleet and what will happen to the 777X.
Now, if every person in the UK stops wasting food for just a day, it would have the same effect on greenhouse gases as planting 500,000 trees. Food waste accounts for around 8% of carbon emissions, and at least some in the country are eyeing a role anaerobic digestion plants could play. Here's Jemima Walker explaining.
The saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And that's certainly true here.
By sending food waste to anaerobic digestion, you're preventing it going into a landfill site. So in a landfill site, the food will break down and the gas will be released to atmosphere. Whereas sending it here, we capture the gas and turn it into energy that people can use.
Here, 34,000 tonnes of food waste a year gets collected from local schools, businesses and homes. It's then depackaged in the food waste reception hall, which is a lot less smelly than it looks. It then gets heated up to make sure diseases are killed.
What kind of things are you protecting against?
Potentially harmful pathogens and bacteria such as E. coli or Salmonella.
The waste sits for 55 days and then gas is taken off the top.
So it really is just like a huge stomach in many ways.
In many ways, exactly. You've got to give it the right diet. If you give it too much salty things, that can harm the bacteria.
This room checks that the gas being processed is pure methane before it gets injected into the national grid. The food process at this plant generates enough power to power 2,500 local homes for a year.
This is what's left.
If you have a smell, it's not too smelly.
No, it doesn't actually smell.
It can be used as fertiliser by local farmers who call it rocket fuel.
I mean, it's very effective. It's 7 days and you can see where it's been applied. It really picks up the crops. In terms of, like, compared to pre-oiled fertiliser, it's tenfold in the sort of effectiveness, I suppose, or the response that you see in the crop.
Anaerobic digesters are eye-wateringly expensive to run and rely heavily on government subsidies. So while anaerobic digestion is an effective and circular way of dealing with food waste, government has to keep putting its hands in its pockets to make sure trash can turn to treasure. Jemima Walker, CGTN, Cheltenham.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, we'll bring you more analysis of debt cancellations proposed at the France-Africa Summit. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, let's head into a short break. My colleague Lindy will be back with more news after this.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's now head to Senegal, where a construction boom in the country has been driven largely by concrete architecture. But an innovative construction firm is opting for a different approach, bringing back the old raw earth architectural style. Here's the story of Warofila and its push for the use of bioclimatic bricks made from compressed raw earth. Nick Mudimba has more.
Most of the unfinished buildings in the Senegalese capital Dakar form a uniform grey color of concrete, but one upcoming building stands out with its unique red bricks. The half-cut bricks that stick out of the walls is an intentional design. It allows for the walls to always be in the shade.
Given the sun that we have, and the fact that we always want to isolate the facade from the sun, having the setbacks sort of gives the cantilever that kind of casts a shadow on the facade, sort of giving it, instead of having a really big cantilever on the roof, having sort of these intermediate ones gives the shade while creating a very unique aesthetic language that can only be achieved with bricks.
The bricks are earthen, made from locally available soil. It is an idea of Warofila, a construction company that is pushing for alternative construction approaches.
I think there's been a bit of a divergence from just very basic principles, which is orientation, using the materials that you have locally, only because, you know, they sort of respond better to the climate. You know, Earth has great inertia. And for sort of a hot and dry climate as we have here, and even for tropical climate, it works really well in regulating the temperature. It's readily available, and to produce it doesn't require any additional CO2 emissions. And it can also create local jobs and reinvigorate, I think, a building traditional know-hows that have been lost for quite some time.
She says Senegal's traditional homes were made this way, using bricks made from raw earth. The need to conserve the environment is one of the reasons that drive the two investors. Unlike concrete, earth and bricks require almost no energy to produce.
Pour produire du ciment, on a besoin de calcaire.
To produce cement, you need limestone. This means that you need limestone pits. In Senegal, the baobab tree grows on limestone. So in order to meet the growing demand for cement, companies deforest classified baobab forests to extract the limestone.
On est obligé de les cimentiers.
Orofila also uses blocks of shredded and compressed taifa, a fast-growing invasive reed found in the Senegal River, which are placed between the floors for acoustic insulation.
Au-dessus de ces briquettes,
the alternative would have been to add plastic or polystyrene insulator. So we are always trying to source locally and organically in order to reach our goals.
This unique idea is slowly gaining traction amongst investors in the construction sector in Senegal. The company has so far been involved in several projects, including private homes, offices, and part of a train station. A local metal manufacturing company called Shula Metal has contracted Orofila to build its workshop and offices.
The choice is obvious because we can't afford to put off the decisions on the environment. So for us, first it is an ethical choice that is caring for the environment and also the money saving. What is really important for us is the well-being of the public who are our partners.
For its efforts, Orofila has been nominated for an Ashden Award. This is a UK prize that highlights global climate solutions. The Orofila team hopes to win it and raise its visibility. Nick Mudimba, CGTN.
Coming up in your sports news.